Hey folks, another day, another week goes by, the news gets crazy, and social media turns into a war zone. And I see people defending the indefensible because we're jumping to have an opinion on things. And instead of trying to fight or argue with people, I wanted to try and just reflect on some mistakes that we're all making in a social media world that's just wild and really hard to keep up with. And a lot of the problem we have is we're all hardworking people. We're busy, we got busy lives, and things change so fast, and there's so much information, and it's hard to tell what's real and what's not, and to be fully informed on an issue. And we find ourselves getting tricked into making an opinion right away. Now, I've got some good news on this, and I'm going to share that later on, but I want to start by talking about how partisan politics and clickbait culture on the internet is making us all stupider. Now, it's normal on the internet, we've all seen it, where everybody's fighting for your attention and we want to smash those buttons. And partisan politics is just like that. There are two political parties in both Canada and the US that have similar-ish politics and have been running things forever. And then they have hard lines on certain issues because they need their attention and they need you to be angry. But their morality seems to change when they're in power and when they're not. And then we get trapped in falling into line behind one party or another, and we often end up defending positions that we don't necessarily believe ourselves. And if we stopped and slowed down and took the time to think about the positions we're taking, maybe we would have different positions, and those positions change based on, again, who's in power and what the push button issue is. But then there's some fundamental truths behind these positions that we lose sight of. So I think one way that happens, and something we have to keep in mind is, again, things are really complicated. And the internet and political parties try and boil things down to a false dichotomy. It's either A or B, it's either black or white, and you've got to be in one of those two columns. Now, the world doesn't work that way. And there are real consequences, negative consequences, for everyday people going around the world, viewing the world like that. The only people that can work in a world like that are, one, politicians that are trying to get you mad at the other guy and voting for them, or fundraising for their party, or talking head content creators who make tons of money getting you angry about an issue and spinning a narrative and continuing to have you in that angry narrative that they're running. But most of us have to live with each other. And again, there are negative consequences to us making mistakes about these issues. There are zero consequences for politicians. When they make a mistake, they talk absolute bullshit. Oops, 10 years later, yeah, that was a total disaster, but whatever, I'm richer now and retired, and it doesn't matter. And content creators, largely it's the same thing. They just keep making mistakes, and we have a short memory. But we have to live with the consequences of that. When we make a foreign intervention and we spend a ton of money in another country, that's money that's not going to our schools, our hospitals, our roads. When we send people to die in other countries or kill people in other countries, that affects us. That's often our neighbors are getting sent to go. People who we know, even if they're not killed, they come back damaged, not necessarily physically, but mentally. If you look at the homeless rates among veterans that come back from foreign conflicts, it's astronomical. It's a shame. And if we cared about our neighbors, if we really supported the troops, we wouldn't be so quick to send people overseas. And we've all got trapped in it. And this is just one issue. I'm going to try and keep this not about left or right or partisan politics or Democrat or conservative or liberal or whatever. I'm just going to talk about the consequences of foreign intervention. And Democrats have supported wars, Republicans have supported wars. In Canada, liberals and conservatives have supported different conflicts. And this idea that every time it's different, and we got to stop doing that. Because if we look back at all these conflicts, they're all founded on lies. They almost all are. You look back at every major conflict since World War II, they're almost always founded on a lie. You look at the big ones, Vietnam and Iraq War. Both of them were founded on a lie. And while people supported it for a while, in the end, almost universally, people admit now that they were a mistake. And in a lot of cases, they made things much worse. And there's the idea that we're going to fix it or we didn't fix it enough. It's like, no, these conflicts in and of themselves, these conflicts that didn't need to happen, made things worse. And it keeps happening, and we keep making more problems for ourselves down the road. And we got to stop doing this. And again, there's this idea that we've got to pick A or B. And I'll just take a modern example. You don't have to be pro-Maduro to say going to Venezuela is a bad idea. Because we've seen the history of foreign intervention in Latin America, and it causes destabilization of governments, it causes violence, and there is always drug running in the background of all these things. It was true for Vietnam, it was true for Afghanistan, and it's true for most Latin American conflicts. And it's now admitted. It's in papers. You can look at the Congress has got documents, approved all this stuff. These conflicts lead to drug running. They lead to violence, that leads to gangs, that leads to destabilization, that leads to all sorts of problems that we working people deal with later. Now, again, we don't have to decide and support something right away just because it's in the media. We know that these people have a bad track record. We shouldn't give them a blank check every time. The same thing is true about government overreach. The government does something. Historically, they don't do it for your interest. They do it for the interest of someone else. And then we convince ourselves that they're doing it for the right reason. And then we support overreach that we shouldn't support. And people that 5 years ago supported something now don't support it because the other party's doing it. But again, we're given these false dichotomies, the idea that it's A or B. And we got to stop and just say, wait a minute. I don't have to be cheerleading the government every time something happens. And that doesn't mean I'm a bad person because my party's in power and I'm not supporting them now. We got to stop that because that's the trap that we fall into. Don't play with people's lives, your lives and other people's lives, just because the government wants you to choose sides. We all got to stop and say, this is not in our collective best interest. Liberal, conservative, socialist, fascist, all these words get thrown around. Stop. Most of us are not in those boxes. And we get trapped in them. And we make a position on something before we're really informed about it, especially when we're dealing with foreign interventions. Most of us don't have the time in our working lives to really know exactly what's going on in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Venezuela, now it's Iran. But then we get in this clickbait internet argument. And then we pick our camp. And then once you're locked in and you keep making mistakes. And it's happened to me. I remember, I'm not going to name names, but there was an intervention in the Middle East where I heard of I think it was Libya, quite honestly. I heard stories in the media about protesters being killed by the government and we got to do something. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe we do need to protect these people from this dictator. And then way on down the road, it came out that actually this country was just trying to get off the gold standard or the U.S. monetary standard for oil purchases or something crazy like that. And then the U.S. government was actually giving money to Islamists that ended up overthrowing the government. And it was part of this whole chain of events where the bad guys who we were trying to stop are in power again and are more power than ever in these places. But I got sucked in and I couldn't know. But when you get hit with that first story in the news, that's been prepared. That's probably been prepared for months. Like, remember, there are full-time professional people with unlimited budgets who are trying to mold your opinion as soon as a story drops. So assume you don't know the whole story and assume it's safer to just say no or I don't know before you start cheerleading, because then you get locked into a position and it's a lot harder to change your opinion. Like, we make mistakes and then we keep making them. And it's don't invest in a mistake because you took a long time making it, but we often do that. So before you pick sides, it's better to just say I don't have a side yet, and I historically don't trust that these people are doing this in my interest. And so maybe I'm going to wait, and I'm not going to cheerlead it, because if you didn't cheerlead something, at least you're not giving support to it. Once it's happened and it's locked in and real people's lives are affected. ours included, but often we're killing people and they become statistics. But there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of civilians who've been killed in our name in the last 20, 30 years because we were sold a lie. And it happens over and over and over again. So don't buy into the lie. Assume that you're being lied to, and assume that it's in our best interest not to kill people. And if we do that, we stand a better chance long term. So I'm going to try and do it. If you can try and do it, we can all talk to each other and treat each other like friends before we start yelling at each other and repeating some government narrative or some quick story you saw. If you're getting your information on social media, you're being molded. And that's just how these things work. And we got to understand that, and we got to slow things down, because there's money to be made from rage bait and clickbait and all these things. There's not a lot of money to be made from slow dialogue. And that's unfortunate. And if it was just about if you like a TV show or not, that's fine. But the problem with social media is it's controlling politics now, and it's being used to control us. And we've got to stop that cycle. So I hope everybody can stop and think about, did I just support something that I wouldn't necessarily support if it was the other guy in power, just because it was sold to me right away? And usually, if you stop to think about the issue, you're going to say, I actually don't know enough to sponsor killing people. And there's long-term consequences that are going to kick back on us. So let's all try to slow down that clickbait response to foreign intervention. And it happens in the domestic issues too, and I'm going to talk about that another time. But the good news I wanted to bring up is, historically, people support wars when they get sold to them. The Vietnam War, again, it took years before public opinion turned, and hundreds of thousands of lost lives. The Iraq War, same thing. It took months, if not years, before people started to really get a mainstream critique of it. And we know now both of those wars were sold on lies, and the end game was millions of deaths, and things are worse for the people living there, and it was just our money thrown away and soldiers' lives were thrown away. And that's just, it's hard to admit for a lot of people, but that's the truth. We know that. This latest poll about intervention in Venezuela, only about a third of the population in the US supported that intervention. And that's good news. Only about a third were against it, but another third said, I don't know enough. And that never happens historically. And that's a really good sign. It means that we're starting to slow down and say, wait a minute, you burned me the last time, and you burned me the time before that. Doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican or liberal, conservative, whatever. The system has an interest. And there's a really important speech that Dwight Eisenhower gave about the military-industrial complex. And go back and watch it. You can look for it. When he was leaving government, Dwight Eisenhower was the president after World War II. He made a big speech about how basically there's an industry of people who are making a ton of money selling weapons, and that they will be a problem politically in the future. And that's not a controversial figure, I don't think. I think if you're in the middle of the road, you should be able to understand that, he had a pretty good view of what was going on. And you can have your critique from left or right or whatever as well, but that speech is important for understanding of why we kept getting sold wars and why we're still being sold wars. And it doesn't matter who's in power, they're going to sell more wars. And you can go even farther back to Smedley Butler, who was one of the most decorated Marines in U.S. history at the time, talking about how even way back, more than 100 years ago, most foreign interventions were based on corporate interests. And that was then, and it's gotten worse. So anyway, I ask everybody to slow down whenever they try and sell us a war. Just stop and say, you know what? Probably I don't know enough about this country to be selling this war. So let's stop fighting each other on someone else's scam. Have a good day.